The black convoy stopped at a red light in the middle of the city. Inside the third car, behind bulletproof glass, sat Vincent Randall, a man worth billions, a man whose name was on buildings, on business magazines, on the lips of every investor in the country. He was checking his phone, bored, distracted. Then his eyes drifted to the roadside. A woman stood under a torn umbrella, sweat sliding down her face, cutting coconuts with a heavy knife. Her hands were rough. Her slippers were broken. Beside her stood two little boys, identical, maybe 7 years old, helping her hand coconuts to customers. Vince's phone slipped from his fingers. He knew that face. He knew it from a wedding photo he had burned years ago. He knew it from nights he still couldn't sleep through. "Maya," he whispered. But it wasn't just her that froze his heart. It was the two boys. Because 8 years ago, doctors told him his twin sons never took a single breath. So why were they standing in front of him, alive, breathing, laughing, helping their mother sell coconuts on the street? The light turned green. The convoy didn't move. Before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe to Amazing Folktale, but only if you genuinely connect with this story. Hype up the video. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what your local time is in the comments below. I love seeing how these stories connect people from all around the world. Let's get started. Vincent Randall did not start life inside marble hallways. He started in a 2-room rented house, the son of a schoolteacher father and a strict, ambitious mother named Catherine Randall. As a boy, he sold newspapers before school, tutored younger kids for pocket money, and slept with textbooks under his pillow because he believed, truly believed, that hard work could rewrite fate. By 22, he had built his first small trading company from a shared desk in a crumbling office. By 30, Randall Industries was a name investors whispered with respect. By 35, he was one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the country. But wealth never changed the core of him. He still tipped waiters generously. He still remembered his old professor's birthday. He still gave scholarships to children from his childhood neighborhood, quietly, without press releases. People who worked closely with him knew one strange thing about Vincent Randall. He never smiled in photos with children. He funded 3 orphanages but never visited them in person. Every year on a certain date in March, he canceled all his meetings and disappeared for the day. No one asked why. His assistant, Jessica Brooks, had learned long ago not to schedule anything on that date. He had married once, young, poor, deeply in love, to a woman named Maya. It was the one part of his life he never spoke about publicly. When journalists asked, his answer was always the same rehearsed line. That chapter is closed. But those who watched him closely noticed something else. Every single time he passed a woman selling fruit on a street corner, his eyes lingered a second too long. Every time a baby cried in a restaurant, his jaw tightened. He built his empire on the outside, successful, unshakable, admired. But somewhere inside, a part of him had never moved past a single night in a hospital corridor. 8 years ago, when a doctor came out and told him words that broke something in him forever. "I'm sorry, Mr. Randall. One of the twins didn't survive." He never got the full truth of that night. He never asked for it either. Grief made him accept what he was told, and guilt made him bury the pain under work, under meetings, under an empire that grew bigger every year while his heart grew quieter. He built billions. But he never built peace. 3 kilometers from Vince's glass office tower, in a narrow lane behind a bus depot, Maya lived in a single rented room with a tin roof that leaked every monsoon. Every morning at 5, she woke before her sons, boiled water on a small stove, and packed 2 lunch tins with whatever she could afford, usually rice and dal, sometimes just bread. She braided her hair quickly, tied her worn sari, and walked with her cart to the same spot under the flyover where she had been selling coconuts for 6 years. Her sons, Aaron and Ethan, were identical twins, but anyone who knew them could tell them apart in seconds. Aaron was the observer, quiet, sharp-eyed, always noticing the things adults thought children missed. Ethan was softer, gentler, always the first to smile at a stranger. Maya never let them beg. Even when money was short, even when the rent was late, she taught them one rule above everything else: work with dignity, never ask for pity. She sacrificed in ways no one saw. She skipped meals so her sons could eat twice a day. She stitched their torn uniforms by hand instead of buying new ones. When Ethan got a fever last winter, she sold her only pair of gold earrings, her wedding gift, to pay for his medicine. But there was one rule stricter than all the others, one she repeated to her sons almost every week, always in a hushed, careful voice. One, never tell anyone your father's name. Not to teachers, not to friends, not to anyone. Do you understand me? The boys didn't understand why. They only knew their mother's eyes changed when she said it. Fear, mixed with something heavier. Something that looked like guilt she didn't deserve to carry. At night, after the boys fell asleep on their shared mat, Maya would take out a small broken locket from beneath her pillow. She never opened it in front of anyone. One night, Erin woke up thirsty and saw her sitting by the window, locket open in her palm, tears sliding silently down her face. Inside was a photograph, a wedding photograph, of a much younger Maya standing beside a man Erin had definitely seen before, on the small television at their neighbor's house, on a magazine cover at the tea stall, on billboards near the highway. The man in the photo was the billionaire everyone in the city talked about. Erin said nothing, but from that night on, he started watching his mother more closely, and he started wondering, quietly, secretly, why his mother cried over a man everyone else admired. Inside Vince's penthouse, his wife Samantha stood in front of the television, watching the evening business news on mute, her arms crossed tightly. Samantha had married Vince 5 years ago, elegant, intelligent, always composed in public. To the world, she was the perfect corporate wife, charity galas, magazine covers, gracious smiles beside her husband at every event. But lately, something had shifted in her. Whenever the anchor mentioned Randall Industries' old shareholder records, her jaw tightened. Whenever a journalist asked Vince about his early years or his first marriage, she would quietly leave the room. She kept a locked drawer in her study that even the housekeeper wasn't allowed to dust. She wasn't cruel to Vince. In fact, she was careful, almost too careful, never pushing him on the topics that made him withdraw. But her fear wasn't about losing his love. It was about something buried in old paperwork. Meanwhile, across the city, in a glass office just 2 floors below Vince's, his business partner Kyle Ryan sat behind his desk, scrolling through his calendar. He stopped on a reminder set 8 years in advance, * twins turn 8, trust matures. He stared at it for a long moment, then closed the laptop. Mitchell had been Vince's partner since the company's early days, trusted, respected, seemingly loyal. He attended every board meeting with a calm, agreeable smile. He never raised his voice, never showed ambition louder than necessary. But behind that calm exterior, Mitchell had spent 2 years quietly funding a private investigator. 2 years learning things about Vince's past that Vince himself didn't know. 2 years waiting. No one suspected him. Why would they? He was the reasonable one, the steady hand, the partner everyone trusted to keep the company balanced. That was exactly how he wanted it. It started with a phone call Erin wasn't supposed to hear. Maya had stepped outside their room to speak to a lawyer, a free legal aid volunteer she'd found through a community center, someone she'd been quietly consulting for months. Erin, curious as always, crept close to the thin wall and listened. They can't take the company from him if the twins are declared dead, the lawyer's guide. Voice said through the phone, barely audible. That's why the paperwork matters, Maya. That's why you need to be careful. Erin didn't understand what company or declared dead meant, but he understood the fear in his mother's voice when she answered. I don't want anything from him. I just want my sons safe. Please, just help me keep it that way. He backed away from the wall quietly, his small heart pounding. He didn't tell his mother what he heard, but he remembered every word, the way children remember the things adults think they've were too young to understand. Around the same time, an old man named Dennis Rowe began appearing near Maya's coconut stall. He was quiet, gray-haired, dressed simply, and he always bought a coconut he barely drank. Each time, he left more money than the coconut cost, sometimes 10 times more, folded into Maya's palm before walking away without a word. Sir, this is too much, Maya said one afternoon, trying to return the extra notes. Keep it, Dennis Rowe said, his voice heavy with something he didn't explain. For the boys, for their school. Maya studied his face. Something about him felt familiar, though she couldn't place it. She didn't know that Dennis Rowe had once been Vince's personal driver, the very man who drove her to the hospital 8 years ago on the night the twins were born. She didn't know he carried a guilt so heavy it had aged him faster than the years should have. He never explained himself. He simply kept returning, week after week, like a man trying to quietly repay a debt only he understood. Maya assumed he was just a kind stranger, but something about his eyes, the way he looked at Aaron and Ethan a second too long, left her uneasy in a way she couldn't name. The pieces were scattering across the city like seeds in wind. A lawyer whispering about a company. A driver leaving guilt money at a coconut stall. A boy remembering words he wasn't meant to hear. None of them connected yet. But something was clearly moving beneath the surface of this story. Something bigger than a poor mother and her sons. Something bigger than a billionaire's empire. And it was only a matter of time before the threads pulled tight. 8 years earlier, on the night the twins were born, Vince had been away on an urgent business trip, a deal he couldn't miss. Or so he'd been told by people close to him. When he finally rushed back to the hospital the next morning, his mother Catherine Randall met him in the corridor, her face composed, her voice gentle but firm. "Beta, sit down," she'd said. "I have to tell you something difficult." She handed him a folded hospital report. Vince remembered every word of it, even now. 1 infant twin, stillborn, mother and second infant stable. He remembered collapsing onto the hospital bench. He remembered Catherine Randall's hand on his back, her voice soothing him. "These things happen, Beta. God has a plan. Focus on what you still have." What he didn't, no one told him, was that the doctor who signed that report had been paid, quietly, generously, to falsify it. There was no stillborn twin. There were 2 healthy, crying baby boys that night. Catherine Randall had made sure of the payment herself, days before the delivery, the moment she learned Maya was carrying twins. Catherine Randall never saw herself as a villain. In her mind, she was protecting her son's future. Maya came from nothing, no business background, no social standing, no dowry, nothing Catherine Randall believed a rising empire needed attached to it. A wife who sold vegetables before marriage, raising 2 children, would be, in Catherine Randall's calculations, a liability to a growing company and a rising family name. So she made a decision. A cruel, calculated decision, wrapped in the language of love. She told Vince 1 twin died. She quietly arranged for Maya to be pressured out of the marriage soon after, through cold behavior, isolation, and a campaign of subtle humiliation that made Maya feel like an outsider in her own home. Maya, grieving what she believed was the loss of 1 child, and worn down by a mother-in-law who made every day feel like punishment, eventually left with both her sons. Sons Vince never knew were both alive. Catherine Randall told her son that Maya abandoned him during his time of grief. Vince believed her. For 8 years, he carried a grief for a son that never actually died, and a resentment for a wife who never actually abandoned him, both built on a single, forged piece of paper handed to him by the person he trusted most in the world. The guilt from that decision hollowed something out inside Catherine Randall too, though she buried it beneath composure and control for years. The same way Vince buried his grief beneath in boardrooms and business deals. Neither of them knew that 8 years later, fate would place a coconut stall directly in the path of a red light and unravel everything. Samantha hadn't always known. For the first 3 years of her marriage, she believed exactly what everyone else believed, that Vince had lost a son at birth, that his first marriage ended in heartbreak and separation, nothing more. She married him with genuine affection, and for a while, their life together felt real. Then, 2 years ago, a courier delivered an old file to their home by mistake, a file meant for Catherine Randall, containing correspondence between Catherine Randall and the doctor from 8 years earlier. Samantha read it out of curiosity. She read it twice more out of horror. She never confronted Catherine Randall. She never told Vince. Instead, she made a quiet decision that would define everything that came after. She chose silence. Exposing the truth meant exposing a scandal that could destroy the family's reputation, threaten the company's stability, and, she admitted to herself in her most honest moments, possibly cost her a marriage and a lifestyle she had grown to depend on. She told herself she was protecting her family. In truth, she was protecting herself. Around the same time, a young financial journalist named Paige Morgan began investigating irregularities in Randall Industries' shareholder documents, a routine story about corporate governance that was about to become anything but routine. Buried in decades-old legal filings, she found an unusual clause. If Vincent Randall's biologic heirs were confirmed alive and unaccounted for, a certain block of shares, nearly 40%, currently under Kyle Ryan's informal control through a trust structure, would revert to Vince's direct lineage, stripping Mitchell of the authority he had quietly built for years. Priya didn't yet understand why this mattered. but she filed it away, sensing there was more beneath the surface. What she didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that Kyle Ryan had discovered the truth about the twins 2 years earlier, through the same private investigator whose calendar reminder read, "Trust matures." He had learned that Vince had 2 living sons, not one dead one, and that this fact, if it ever was surfaced, would collapse the very shareholding structure that gave Mitchell his power. So Mitchell did what Catherine Randall once did. He chose silence, dressed up as loyalty. He smiled at board meetings. He praised Vince publicly. And privately, he made sure the truth stayed buried, waiting for the twins' 8th birthday. The date his trust clause would fully mature and lock his control permanently, making the truth, whenever it surfaced, financially irrelevant. 3 people, 3 secrets, 3 silences, each one convincing themselves they weren't the villain. And somewhere across the city, a 7-year-old boy was quietly connecting a face in a locket to a face on a billboard. The charity gala was the kind of event Maya never imagined attending, until the catering company she occasionally worked extra shifts for was hired for it, and short-staffed enough to pull her in for the evening. She stood near the kitchen doors in a plain black uniform, trying to stay invisible, while Aaron waited outside in the staff parking area with a neighbor who'd agreed to watch him for an hour. But Aaron, restless and curious, wandered inside through a side entrance. That's when he saw him. Across the crowded ballroom, under bright chandeliers, stood the man from his mother's locket, older now, in an expensive black suit, shaking hands with people who all seemed eager for his attention. Aaron froze. Vince, mid-conversation with a donor, felt an odd pull in his chest and turned. His eyes landed on a small boy standing near the entrance, staring at him with an intensity no child should have. For reasons Vince couldn't explain, his feet moved toward the boy before his mind caught up. "Hey there," Vince said, crouching slightly. "Are you lost, buddy?" Aaron said nothing. He simply stared, memorizing the face he'd only seen in a broken photograph. Something about the boy's eyes, the shape of them, the quiet intensity, struck Vince in a place he didn't understand. An ache, sudden and unexplainable, rose in his chest. "What's your name?" Vince asked gently. Before Aaron could answer, Maya appeared, breathless, having spotted him from across the room. "Aaron, I told you to stay outside." She stopped mid-sentence. Her eyes met Vince's for the first time in 8 years. The room seemed to disappear around them. Vince straightened slowly, his mind struggling to process what his heart already recognized. "Maya?" She grabbed Aaron's hand, pulling him gently but urgently toward the exit. "I'm sorry, we shouldn't be here." "Wait," Vince called out, but she was already moving. Before she disappeared through the doors, Vince, still not understanding why, called after her, "Let me help with the boys' school fees. Please. I'd like to." He didn't know why he said it. He didn't know why his chest felt like it was being pulled apart. Maya didn't answer. She simply walked faster, her hand tightening around her son's. Aaron's Vince stood there long after they'd gone, staring at the door, a strange, unshakable feeling settling over him. The feeling of almost remembering something he'd been told never existed. Samantha heard about the gala encounter within hours. A mutual acquaintance mentioned it, casually, not realizing the weight of what they were saying. "Your husband got so strange tonight, talking to some coconut seller and her son near the kitchen doors." Samantha's stomach dropped. That night, she made a decision driven entirely by panic. She quietly hired a man through a contact she'd used once before for a personal matter, someone discreet, someone who wouldn't ask questions, and sent him to find Maya. 2 days later, a stranger approached Maya near her stall, sliding an envelope across the small wooden table. "There's 50,000 rupees in there," he said flatly. "There will be more if you and your sons relocate. Far." Quietly. No contact with anyone from the Randall family. Ever. Maya stared at the envelope, her hands trembling, not from temptation, but from fury. For 8 years, she had accepted humiliation, poverty, and isolation without complaint. She had swallowed her pride to protect her sons from a family that clearly didn't want them. But something in this moment, the casual cruelty of being bought and dismissed like an inconvenience, broke through the silence she'd carried for so long. "Tell whoever sent you," Maya said, pushing the envelope back across the table, her voice shaking but firm, "that my sons are not something to be paid off. We are not disappearing." The man left without another word. That night, Aaron asked his mother the question she had been dreading for years. "Mama, is that man from the party? Is he in the locket photo?" Maya sat down slowly beside him, tears already forming. Aaron, Beta, it's complicated. Is he our father? Aaron asked, his young voice steady in a way that broke her heart more than any anger could have. Maya couldn't lie to him anymore. She simply nodded, unable to speak. Meanwhile, across the city, Kyle Ryan moved his own plan forward with sudden urgency. The twins' 8th birthday was less than 3 weeks away. If word of their existence spread before his trust clause matured, his control over 40% of Randall Industries could collapse. He began quietly pushing for an emergency shareholder vote, using outdated paperwork that still listed no living direct heirs as the official company record, a technicality he intended to exploit before anyone could correct it. And in a quiet apartment across town, old Dennis Rowe sat alone with a photograph he'd kept hidden for 8 years, a photo he's secretly taken on his phone the night the twins were born, showing 2 healthy, crying babies in the hospital nursery. He had carried this guilt long enough. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he'd looked up weeks earlier, the number of a journalist named Paige Morgan, who had recently published an article questioning irregularities in Randall Industries' ACE shareholder records. "I think I have something you need to hear," he said quietly. About the Randall twins. Paige Morgan met Dennis Rowe at a quiet tea stall away from the city center, recorder placed carefully between them on the table. For the first time in 8 years, Dennis Rowe told the full truth, how he had driven Maya to the hospital that night, how he'd waited outside the delivery room, how a nurse had let him glimpse the nursery before the official report was signed. 2 healthy twin boys, not 1, not a stillbirth. 2. He described watching Catherine Randall arrive early the next morning with an envelope for the attending doctor. He described the doctor's changed demeanor afterward, and the report that came out hours later, stating only 1 child had survived. "I should have said something back then," Dennis Rowe admitted, his voice breaking. "I was afraid of losing my job, of going against the family that employed me for 15 years. I've regretted it every day since." Priya recorded every word, her hands trembling slightly with the weight of what she was uncovering. This wasn't just a family secret anymore, it was fraud, forged medical documentation, and a corporate structure built on a lie that had shaped control over hundreds of millions in company shares. Around the same time, in a small government school across the city, a teacher noticed Aaron sitting unusually quiet during recess. Gently, she asked if something was wrong. "My mom says my dad thinks we're dead," Aaron said simply, without any understanding of the weight behind his own words. "But we're not dead. We're right here." The teacher, alarmed by what sounded like it could be a serious family or safety concern, followed proper protocol and reported the statement to the school counselor, who escalated it further. Within days, a routine child welfare inquiry was opened, not out of scandal, but out of genuine concern for the children's well-being. It was this inquiry, moving through official channels, that inadvertently connected to Priya's ongoing investigation into Randall Industries when a caseworker cross-referenced the family name. Meanwhile, Priya tracked down the original attending physician, now retired, living quietly, visibly uncomfortable the moment she mentioned the Randall family. After hours of gentle but persistent questioning, the old doctor broke down. "I kept a copy," he confessed. "The real one. I couldn't destroy it. Some part of me knew it might matter one day." He retrieved a yellowed folder from a locked drawer, the original, unaltered birth record. 2 healthy twin boys, born minutes apart, both alive, both stable. Proof. After 8 years of silence, the truth was finally assembling itself, piece by piece, witness by witness, moving steadily toward the one person who had been kept in the dark the longest. Catherine Randall had been unwell for weeks, dizziness, exhaustion, a heaviness in her chest that finally sent her to the hospital for tests. The results weren't fatal, but they were serious enough to shake her. A warning that her body was aging faster than her will allowed her to admit. Lying in a hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, something in her cracked open. When Vince visited her that evening, she asked him to sit down. Her voice, usually so composed, trembled in a way he had never heard before. "Beta, I need to tell you something. I have carried it for 8 years, and I cannot carry it into whatever comes next." Vince sat, confused, as his mother began to speak. She told him everything, the forged hospital report, the payment to the doctor, the decision she made because she believed, in her flawed and controlling way, that she was protecting his future from a marriage and a family she deemed unworthy of his rise. She told him both his sons had survived, that Maya never abandoned him. She left because Catherine Randall made her life unbearable. Then let Vince believe the opposite. "I thought I was saving your empire," Catherine Randall whispered, tears finally breaking through 8 years of composure. "I nearly destroyed your family instead." Vince sat in stunned silence, the ground beneath his entire identity shifting. The grief he'd carried for a son who never died, the resentment toward a wife who never left him by choice. 8 years, rebuilt now in his mind as an elaborate, cruel lie. He walked out of the hospital room without a word, his hands shaking, his mind replaying every version of the truth he'd been told. That same night, as if the universe had decided to strip away every remaining illusion at once, Vince received a call from Paige Morgan, a journalist he'd never spoken to, requesting an urgent meeting regarding serious irregularities in his company's shareholder records and his family history. He met her within the hour, still reeling from Catherine Randall's confession. Priya laid out everything: Dennis Rowe's testimony, the original hospital records, the forged report, and the piece that made Vince's blood run cold, evidence that his own wife, Samantha, had known about the living twins for 2 years and said nothing. "There's documentation," Priya said gently, sliding a folder across the table. "Correspondence that was misdelivered to your home 2 years ago." Mrs. Randall read it. "She never told you." Vince stared at the folder for a long time before opening it. 2 betrayals in a single night. A mother who buried the truth to protect an empire. A wife who buried it to protect her place beside him. And somewhere across the city, a broken locket held the only thing in this entire story that had never lied to anyone. A photograph of a woman and a man who had once, briefly, been genuinely happy. The emergency shareholder meeting Mitchell had pushed forward arrived exactly as planned, except nothing else went according to his plan. Vince walked into the boardroom, holding the original hospital records, Dennis Rowe's signed testimony, and Priya's full investigative file. The room fell silent as he placed the documents on the table in front of every board member present. 8 years ago, I was told one of my sons died at birth, Vince said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. That was a lie. Both my sons are alive, and someone in this room has known for 2 years, using that knowledge to protect a shareholding structure that depends on the world believing I have no living heirs. Mitchell's composed smile faltered for the first time in years. "Vince, I don't know what you've been told, but don't." Vince cut him off, his voice sharp enough to silence the room completely. "I have your investigator's own records, Mitchell. 2 years. You've known for 2 years and said nothing, not out of loyalty, but because my sons, being alive, threatens your 40%. The board members exchanged uneasy glances as Priya documentation was passed around the table, undeniable, methodical, damning. Mitchell didn't try to argue further. He simply sat back, the calm mask finally slipping into something colder, something that looked almost relieved to no longer have to pretend. Later that evening, Vince faced a very different kind of confrontation, quieter, heavier, in the privacy of their home. He stood across from Samantha in the living room, the folder from Priya still in his hand. 2 years, he said softly. There was no shouting in his voice, only exhaustion. You knew for 2 years that my sons were alive, that they were out there, that Maya raised them alone in poverty, while I mourned a child who never died. And you said nothing. Samantha's eyes filled with tears. Vince, I was scared. I didn't know how to bring it up without destroying everything. Everything? Vince repeated quietly, was already destroyed. You just chose to protect yourself instead of fixing it. He didn't yell. He didn't accuse her further. He simply turned and walked toward the door, carrying a silence far heavier than any argument it could have been. The silence of a man who finally understood exactly how alone he had been, surrounded the entire time by people who chose their own interests over his truth. The fallout moved quickly once the truth became public. Kyle Ryan was removed from Randall Industries within the week, the board voting unanimously once Priya's investigation became formal evidence. Fraud charges followed soon after, tied to the forged shareholder documentation and his suppression of information relevant to company control. The calm, trusted partner who had built his position on patience and silence lost everything in a matter of days. His shares, his reputation, and eventually, facing mounting legal pressure, his freedom as charges moved toward prosecution. Samantha's exposure was quieter, but no less devastating. When the story broke publicly, a human interest piece Priya wrote with careful sensitivity toward the children involved, the details of Samantha's 2-year silence became part of the public record. Her social circle, built entirely on image and appearances, distanced itself almost overnight. The divorce Vince filed shortly after was uncontested. Samantha had little standing to fight it, and even less desire to remain in a spotlight that no longer flattered her. Catherine Randall's punishment was different from the others. Not legal, not public, but perhaps the hardest of all three. She faced no criminal charges. The statute of limitations and her age made prosecution unlikely, and Vince, despite everything, couldn't bring himself to pursue legal action against his own mother. But she had to live with what she'd done. Watch her son rebuild a relationship with grandsons she had denied him for 8 years, and slowly, painfully, earn back a fraction of trust that might never fully return. "I don't hate you," Vince told her during one difficult visit, weeks later. "But I don't know how to forgive you yet, either. Give me time." It wasn't punishment delivered by a court. It was something harder, the quiet, ongoing consequence of watching the family she tried to protect heal without her at its center. For Dennis Rowe, karma arrived gently, as it often does for those who eventually choose courage over comfort. Vince, upon learning the old driver had carried this guilt alone for 8 years and ultimately risked everything to expose the truth, personally thanked him, and quietly arranged a pension that let him live the rest of his years without worry. "You didn't have to say anything," Vince told him. "But you did. That matters more than you know." Justice, in the end, arrived exactly the way it usually does in real life, not through dramatic punishment alone, but through the slow, undeniable weight of consequences finally landing on the people who had spent years running from them. Vince didn't arrive at the coconut stall in a convoy of black cars. He came alone, in a plain shirt, parking a modest car a block away and walking the rest. Maya saw him approaching from a distance, and for a moment, old instincts told her to pull her sons close and walk away. But something in the way he walked, slower, humbler, without the weight of an empire trailing behind him, made her stay. Vince stopped a few feet from the stall. His eyes moved from Maya to the 2 boys standing beside her, watching him with matching cautious expressions. He knelt down, bringing himself to their eye level for the first time in either of their lives. "I didn't know," he said quietly, his voice breaking slightly. "I didn't know you existed. I'm sorry it took this long to find out." Aaron studied him carefully, the way he'd studied the photo in the locket 100 times before. "Are you really our father?" "I am," Vince said. "And I'm sorry for every birthday I missed, even though I didn't know they were happening." Ethan, quieter than his brother, simply stepped forward and, without a word, reached out and took Vince's hand, a small, uncertain gesture that carried more forgiveness than any speech could have. Maya stood back, arms crossed, watching carefully. She didn't run into his arms. She didn't cry with relief. 8 years of struggle had taught her that trust wasn't something rebuilt in a single moment, no matter how emotional it was. "This doesn't erase everything," she said quietly, when Vince finally looked up at her. "I know," Vince replied. "I'm not asking it to. I just want the chance to be here now. However long it takes for you to believe that." She nodded slowly, guarded but no longer closed. It wasn't a reunion of falling into each other's arms. It was smaller than that, and somehow more honest. A beginning, not an ending. Over the following months, Vince visited often, never with grand gestures, never with cameras or announcements. He learned Aaron liked to draw and Ethan liked to read. He sat on plastic chairs outside their small rented room, drinking tea, learning who his sons actually were instead of who he'd imagined they might have been. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Aaron sat by the window, holding the small broken locket his mother had carried for 8 years. He opened it one last time, looked at the old photograph inside, his parents, young and hopeful, long before everything that happened. Then he closed it gently and set it aside. He didn't need the photograph anymore. His father was right there, sitting beside his mother on the small porch, both of them quiet, both of them healing, not perfectly, not completely, but honestly. And sometimes, that's exactly where real families begin.
Moral of the story teaches us that lies, secrets, and selfish decisions can cause years of pain and suffering. Vincent lost precious time with his wife and children because people he trusted chose to hide. the truth for their own benefit. It reminds us that honesty is always better than deception, no matter how difficult the truth may seem. The story also shows the importance of love, forgiveness, and perseverance. Maya worked hard to raise her twin sons with dignity, despite facing poverty and injustice. She never gave up on teaching them good values and self respect. In the end, the truth came to light, proving that justice may be delayed, but it cannot be hidden forever. Vincent's willingness to accept the truth, apologize, and rebuild his relationship with his family teaches us that it is never too late to make things right. The story encourages us to value family above wealth, power, or reputation. True happiness comes from honesty, kindness, and strong relationships, not from money or success. Above all, it reminds us that every action has consequences, and choosing integrity and compassion will always lead to a better future.